Always concentrate on how far you have come rather than how far you have left to go. The difference in how easy it seems will amaze you. Unknown.
Join me as we jump into the Autism Navigation Pod. What has your experience been with all the data and seeing progress, whether things that you observed or on paper, and kind of how has that all worked out?
So we have actually seen huge progression with our son. And I have said many times that I don't know exactly what has helped, meaning I feel like we did several things all at once, and the combination of all of it, I think, has helped. And ABA has been a big part of that. We had him in a preschool that was a special education preschool with the local school district, and he went to that for a while, and then we also had ABA therapy. And the other thing that we had was that I actually had my son tested for lead poisoning. And we lived in a super old home that was built in the 1900s. And my daughter had had a speech delay. And I actually had a cousin that her child had had lead poisoning and it caused a speech delay. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to have him tested. And he actually came up with lead poisoning. And so we got the lead out of the system and found where the lead was coming from. And I think that made a difference. And then we added, like I said, the ABA and the preschool. The data that we got from ABA at first was, so you start this process and they bring these therapists into your home. And for the first while, you really feel like you're paying for a very expensive babysitter because they get to know your son or daughter, but my son, they were getting to know my son and getting a rapport with him. And at first I was like, is this really, I mean, what are we doing here? I don't understand what we're doing. And then you'd get data from them. And I'll be honest that the data that we got at first, I didn't understand what we were looking at, and so then again, there was lots and lots of questions that I asked. And the company that we were working with was actually very, very good at answering any questions that we had. And that was a big deal to me, that I was like, okay, you're sending me these charts, but what does these charts mean? What do these numbers mean? What does all this data mean? And I, a lot of times, didn't understand it. I still, to this day, understand some of it, but not all of it. But what I do understand is the huge improvements that my son has made. And I understand what they're doing now, as we go along. And I feel like now I'm more involved in the process of saying, okay, this is the goals that we want. Because at the first of the process, I didn't know what the goals were that I wanted. I didn't know what ABA could do for me. And now I feel like I do know. And I do, I'm sure there's a lot that I don't know, but I feel like I'm more involved and more of an advocate of, this is what the ultimate goal is that we want to meet here.
And we've got another great guest today. Her name is Tatum Winslow. Tatum got her undergrad from Utah State University. She worked at Autism Support Services, Education, Research, and Training, more commonly known as the ASSERT program up at Utah State University. She learned about ABA for the first time there, and that is also where I met her, and we've been friends for about 14 years now. She got her graduate degree in applied behavior analysis from Fresno State University. She's been a BCBA, board certified behavior analyst, for over 7 years. She's worked in the field to support those typically with autism, uh, through a couple different ABA companies, but now she works for a company called Motivity, and she is the director of clinical success there. It's a electronic data collection company, mostly used by applied behavior analysis companies. And something you probably wouldn't have guessed about her, her favorite animal is a cow. So Tatum, thank you so much for being here. It's so good to see you again. We need to do this more. How are you? Awesome. Tatum, thank you so much for joining us to talk about data collection. I know it's such an important part of what we do as behavior analysts, and I just really appreciate you taking the time to share some of your expertise.
You are so welcome. I'm always happy to help a friend. So ask
Absolutely.
away.
Yes, yes, I certainly will. So, I mean, you've kind of made your career to this point, like about data. Why is it so important?
Wow, that is a very big question. I would say data is so important because that is literally how you measure things. Career-wise, it's important because that was how we were measuring progress, and not only progress with clients or learners that we were working with, but that data was also really a demonstration of my own progress as a BCBA and how effectively I'm helping an individual. The data wasn't really ever a reflection of that person's, like, ability or lack thereof. It was more so a reflection of my ability to teach that individual.
Mm,
And I think that's a really important thing for people to understand when they're looking at a graph or just looking at progress, is that it's yes, it's a reflection of how they are progressing and are, like, acquiring those skills, but it's based on the instructions and tools you give that individual. So really it's a reflection on you. And if it's variable or not go in a direction that's desirable for all parties, then that means you need to do something to assist that individual. And so I think that's really cool because it allows you to self-reflect. And it doesn't lie to you. It's not going to be that friend that's like, no, it's totally fine. It's going to be very blunt, it's just going to be very honest and it doesn't have any emotion in it. So I think professionally speaking, data is really awesome for that. But if you're just talking about like day-to-day life, same thing. I've learned to really love data just in my day-to-day life. I have apps now that help me see graphically how I'm doing on certain goals and things like that. So I definitely incorporate that into my life a lot more than I think I would have otherwise.
I think it's such a good point, and that's such a good perspective too, because a lot of these families, like this is a podcast, kind of A to Z, right? And so a lot of these
Mhm.
families come in, and it's really easy to focus on the things that your child is not doing. But if we look at it in terms of like this is the type of progress that they're making, and it really puts the onus on the practitioner, which it should. I think that's a really valuable and really powerful perspective to take as far as data goes.
Thank you. Yeah. And I
Um,
can't say that I had it right out the gate. That was something I definitely had to learn, and I think that's something hopefully good BCBAs will understand as they get older in the field over time.
mhm, absolutely. So there's so much data. How do we interpret those data that we get from client progress and learner progress? What do we do with those data?
Okay. I think, maybe I've answered that a little bit with the first question, just kind of my take on what data is for or are for. But, how I interpret it, again, I think is just bringing together how effective am I as a practitioner in helping this individual with whatever skill set they are wanting to learn or develop? And at what point should I be making changes to this intervention? Something that was really valuable when I was in grad school was they taught us how to read the graphs in such a way where we could see, here's a decision point. After it's variable this many times, about 3 to 5 data points, okay, we got to stop. We got to make a decision right here because this is obviously not going anywhere. Or if something that we're hoping to see increases is decreasing steadily after a few data points, that's a decision point, so on and so forth. And so I think data is helping you, is really your partner because you cannot just do this by feeling like it feels right,
Mhm.
that's a part of it to an extent because you kind of have to go with what feels best for that individual, what the family is also feeling is best too. But at the end of the day, like I said before, the data will tell the full story. And so it's really your partner in helping another individual and helping you be a better practitioner because it's going to give it very clearly to you. And so I think how we are interpreting the data is just seeing, okay, is this effective? Is this helpful? And at what point do I need to make a decision to pivot to then further this person's progress?
So data obviously is so important, despite maybe how nerdy it might sound. We know that like that's like you said, it's our friend because it's honest, it's truthful. So who is likely in the service delivery process? Who is likely to be collecting data so that we do have those data points?
Right. Actually, that can be everyone on the team. The person that will probably be taking the most data day to day will be that frontline staff member. So the BT, the RBT, whoever's working with that individual, most often. The BCBA will certainly be taking data on certain programs. The parent or guardian of that individual will definitely take data at some point as well. And with if that individual who maybe is at the center of all these services is willing and also able, they are also very much data collectors in their own services. An example of this is I have had adolescent clients who, we had to make a contract essentially of, hey, here's what I'll do and here's what you're going to do. And then we're both getting payoff because, after you've completed your task, that's what all I wanted. And then you get to have whatever it is that was contingent on that. And they can actually track how they're doing with that contract or track, hey, how did I do? Was I able to kind of hit these key steps in this activity? And they might mark it off themselves. So that's a way that they would take data for themselves as well. So really everybody can and probably to an extent should be data collectors whenever they are involved in this. I think what will vary is just how much data each individual will be taking day to
Mhm.
day to week.
So it sounds like there's a few different ways that you can collect data, depending on who's taking the data, what their level of training is, if it's the person themselves. What are some of those ways that the data collection might take place?
Yeah. So, what you are wanting to find is what is going to work best for each individual that will be collecting that data. It's probably going to look different for a parent from maybe a staff member because you have to work with what they're just able to do. A staff member, that's their job, right? So, how they're going to be taking data is going to be much more intensive. And you're going to want to try and find ways that individual who's receiving services or the guardian of that individual can take data in a way that is successful and fits in with their life. So yes, that can be as simple as having a like laminated piece of paper on the fridge and they just like do a check mark that the BT the next time they come in they could just note what was on that laminated piece of paper and they can put that in for them. I work for a company called Motivity, and we're an electronic data collection system. We actually have the ability to create parent profiles, if you will, where a parent can log in and actually collect data on their phone. So it might be easier for them to just have it on their phone. They can quickly go into the app and then just click like, plus or minus, did this happen? Or was I able to practice this with my child or what have you? And so it can be electronic. It can be something as simple as, like I said, the piece of paper uh, on a fridge. I've done it where I've just printed out a calendar for a family and just said, hey, mark the days you did this thing. And that's all I need to see. So it really depends, though. And you have to be flexible in what the family is able to do based on
Mhm.
just their day to day life. But also hold yourself as the practitioner and as the BT to a higher standard of this is my job. I need to be collecting this data and getting this full picture. And honestly, I feel like the better data you have, the more motivated other members of the team are to also get engaged with that. Because if they're saying, hey, I'm improving this skill, or hey, my child's improving in this skill, I want to practice this too. That's when I would see the most success and maybe getting buy-in from the rest of the team is, hey, look what we're seeing. I'd love to see if you're also seeing this objectively, right? That would be really exciting for them. And so
Mhm.
9 times out of 10, they would agree. And we would just figure out what would work best for them. Like, what's the best modality for you to take this data that we can then measure how things are going in this setting, in that setting.
And it seems really like the underlying theme behind like all of your answers really seems like it just like the answer is always it depends. Like on what the situation is, what's the context, who is the learner. Would you say that's about accurate?
I would say it's about accurate, because again, every person's different. Everyone has a different lifestyle. Um,
Mhm.
I will say that there are probably easier ways than others, but again, you have to find what works for you. What I have found with, sorry to toot my own horn again, but with those parents who have decided to opt into like doing electronic data collection, they really like that because they're able to see the graph right away. And then the practitioner, if they're not in the home, like, observing, they'll actually see, like, immediately the parents' results because it's like they get immediate updates of, data when it's input. And so some parents really love that because they love to be able to log in and be like, "Oh, I immediately am seeing how this is looking and everything. I don't have to wait for my BCBA to come here and explain it to me. I can see it for myself." Whereas other parents are just like, "I'm fine. I just need something simple that I can do very quickly." Um, and so, yes, on that end, I would say it very much depends. But I think knowing what your style is, like if you're a really techie person or if you enjoy being able to have it in the palm of your hand at all times, then do it. If you just need it in a same like one place where you know where it's going to be always, and you can just walk over there with a whiteboard marker and just mark it off, then do that. And as a parent, for any parents who might be listening to this, I would also just say like advocate for what your needs are. If a BCBA is saying, "Hey, I'd love this, this, and this," definitely try, but be honest with yourself and be honest with them, maybe I can't do all 3 right now. I don't have the capacity because 'cause I've got other children or I've got a full-time job or whatever. But, advocate to say, "Hey, but I think I could do this and this." And then maybe what you'll find is once you're getting those 2 things done, maybe a 3rd thing isn't such a big ask because you're already able to incorporate this into your day-to-day. So that was a really long way of saying, yes, it depends.
I love it. I love it. And you should always be tooting your own horn, Tatum. I've
Oh,
known
thank
you for a
you.
long time. It's all good things. So you mentioned a little bit about like parents either logging in or seeing the data. What are some common ways that data can be or is presented to parents from your experience?
I think we're in the middle of a big shift where majority now is gonna be electronically displayed. Back in the day, it would usually be in a binder, and you'd have the paper graphs. You know this full well, Jesse. You have the paper graphs, you'd go over it with the parents and things like that. But, what's really nice about the electronic data collection systems now is that, you really can just be given a login and you can then see what, how your child or how this adult, if you are the one receiving services, you could have your own login and go see, "How am I doing?" Um, and I think that's just the way of the future. It's the way that things are gonna go because, just everything is technology based now, right? And so, basically, I think having a technology-based data collection system is a real strength because, like I said before, you can get that immediate feedback. You can immediately see how is my child doing or how am I doing as a BCBA. I can peek in and see, hey, how's this parent doing on this goal, and I can just kind of take a quick sneak peek and just get a good idea of what's happening. And in some cases, and at least in Motivity's case, what's really cool too is that like your BTs, if they're curious, like, hey, I feel like I'm not doing so well with this program, but I feel like, Jesse does amazing with it. I can't figure out what's going on. They can actually check the data of their colleagues and just kind of see, oh, okay, yeah, Jesse is doing really well. I should go talk to him and see what's going on, or at least bring it up to my BCBA to say, hey, could you see what Jesse's doing and just tell me
Mhm.
what I'm doing? And it's just really cool that they can see that rather than have like not nameless, because we do have to label, like put initials next to your data points, but kind of hard to decipher data points on a piece of paper. You can see and break it all down in electronic data collection systems, which I think is a big strength.
Mhm.
A
And
big
how empowering for parents to be able to look at those
Yeah.
data and reach out to the BCBA and say, "Hey, I've noticed this," or "I saw this on the graph," and
Mhm.
be able to really like be in charge of their child's progress and service delivery.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Um, Tatum, I wanted to address like what I feel like is maybe a misconception about data, that you have to be basically, for lack of a better term, a math nerd to interpret data or to collect data. And you've mentioned there's a lot of different ways to collect data, but as far as like interpreting data, I think a lot of times it's just unknown for a lot of people. They're like, oh, data, that's like for mad scientists. Um, how would you advise parents or individuals who are looking at their own data to not feel that they have to be these math wizards to understand what their data is saying?
Sure. Yeah. That's a really good question. And I think, and honestly, maybe that like misconception probably had some truth to it in the beginning, just because we didn't have, as much technology to help us with all of that. Like if you're trying to do a rate graph, like a rate per hour, rate per minute, that you will have to do math for, right? At least you did. If you're doing maybe an Excel spreadsheet, you still probably have to at least, at the very least, know the formulas so that you can get those mathematical formulas working for you. But what's nice now for parents is really the data itself. It's really just the input. So, did this person do this thing? Yes or no? And just me being able to say yes or no, that is data, that is a datum rather. And like all of those answers all together are data. And the dot you see on the graph is just a culmination of all of that being put together. And so I think this is where I'll just kind of ring the bell for electronic data collection systems. Again, is just that will do all of that for you. And what's really cool is that if you want something a little bit more complex, like, oh, I want to see how things go do on an interval, or I'd really like to see something that's rate per minute, but now I want to see it rate per hour. There are systems that will do that for you. Namely ours. I can't speak for anybody else, but I know mine. But like, it's nice because systems are coming out where they're allowing more flexibility for both parents and BCBAs to interpret what's going on. So they don't have to be math wizards. They don't even have to like math. They can just kind of say like, these are the settings I want, and then put that in, and then they can get that output. Or I want to see, even a separation of how is my client working with the parent versus this staff member, this versus this staff member, and they can just like see a whole stream of like different data trends on there. And that's really cool. Whereas before, you would definitely have to break that down and see, okay, Jesse did this 5 times and Tatum did this 6 times. Now I got to make new graphs for them. It's really cool what electronic data collection systems will let you do now, so that you don't have to be up in that all the time, but you can let something else do that work for you. It's very much a work smarter, not harder concept. And I think you can totally be a data nerd without having to just kind of know all the science behind it, or even just like the math behind it all. But I think having like a basic knowledge of that is where you might make some good decisions on how you want to graphically display something. Maybe it's a better idea to display something as rate per hour than just like a pure count for the day, right? Because if you can see rate per hour, then you might see, oh, I can see that like when we have a 3-hour session, this is what it looks like. When we have a 2-hour session, this is what it looks like. And maybe you actually have more rate per hour in the 2-hour session rather than the 3-hour session, but maybe that 3-hour session has a bigger count. So it's like there's a lot of things that you can consider, but you don't have to be the one to be in charge of all the decision making all the time when you have so many options. In a collection system like Motivity, where you can just like put in some settings and say, this is what I want. But yes, having some like maybe basic idea about how you want it to be displayed might require a little bit of math like knowledge and know-how, just because then you'll be more informed on how you want that to look. But I would say that's far from a requirement, especially now. Maybe it's a perk, but
Mhm.
nothing that you need to have.
Yeah, it sounds like a very positive shift that you talked about to this kind of more of a electronic data presentation, just because it seems like you can make it as, in a lot of cases, make it as detailed or as simplistic as you'd like.
Yeah.
Tatum, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for donating your time, being so generous. Do you any kind of like last thoughts or anything that you think would be helpful for families, parents, caregivers, whomever to know about data?
I think what I would tell parents and clients too, who are able to advocate for themselves, um, when thinking about data, I think I've been maybe talking about it a little bit more because I am a practitioner as a practitioner's tool, and that's true, but it's very much your tool as well. And so I think my parting thoughts on this is I would just make sure that you feel comfortable understanding what you're looking at. And if you don't understand what you see, ask the BCBA, like, I see this graph is maybe looking different than I thought it should or would. What does this mean? Or can you walk me through that? Maybe you don't have access to a parent portal through whatever data collection system they were using, whether it be like paper and pencil or an Excel spreadsheet or an electronic data collection system. Maybe you don't have access to that. And so I would definitely have you advocate for yourself that you should have some sort of access, whether that's through like a monthly meeting with the BCBA where they can explain it all to you, or where you can get some sort of parent login for whatever system that they're using. Obviously, for Excel, that might be a little bit more difficult, but for an electronic data collection system, that's not too difficult to ask. Probably even for like paper and pencil, they could probably make copies of the graphs on a copy machine or something and send that to you. But I would just say you should look at the data too, feel very safe in asking questions, because that's our job as your service provider, is to be able to tell you what's going on. A lot of times in ABA, we like to use a medical model. And so if you think of your doctor giving you results and you're not sure how to interpret them, you're going to go ask your doctor, like, what does this mean? And we are there, and that's our job to explain it. Hopefully, our results can be much more clear. I know that whenever I get blood work done, I'm like, I have no idea what any of this is. I got to call them. But for a graph where you just might see data points with a line attaching everything, hopefully that will already be a clear enough picture. But you're also very much allowed to make interpretations based on this graph too. That's going to be my job as a practitioner, and whoever is providing services for you, their job as well. You are also okay to say, hey, this just seems more variable than I would expect, or hey, this seems to be going down, and I don't think that's the direction we're wanting. And you can also make suggestions like, do you think we should change the intervention? Do you think this would work better? And as a practitioner, they're going to take that into consideration. Maybe there's a reason, maybe there are some clinical reasons that something is happening, and they can explain that to you. But it's really good to hear your voice too, because you ultimately know yourself if you're the recipient of these services, or your child if they're the recipient of these services, better than we do. We might know the science of ABA, and that's great, but we are not an expert in you or your kid. And so just kind of knowing that the data itself is a tool for you just as much as it's a tool for me, I think is very empowering, and you should absolutely use it and wield it, so that you can also be very much a part of the decision making and everything that entails. So that, I guess, is my point, is it's a tool for you too. This is not exclusive to any practitioner, but it's definitely to be shared with you as well.
Tatum, I think that's such a good point. And I think even being in the field for a while, I feel like I still get fresh perspectives from you, and just really appreciate all your knowledge and the time and effort you've put into becoming a really excellent practitioner. And so I just really appreciate you taking the time today to chat with us, impart some of that knowledge on us, and so that we're able to kind of get better as practitioners and maybe be more comfortable as parents or guardians or people in services themselves. So just thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for just thinking of me, Jesse. It was humbling to be thought of, because I think you're doing some awesome things in the field. And I love that you're making something that can be yet another tool, hopefully, for parents and guardians to use on this journey, or even someone who's an adult who gets, a diagnosis later in life. I hope they can find this to be really useful. And so I think you're doing some good stuff.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Tatum. Do you want to kind of like summarize the advice that you have for parents who might be in the early stages of autism?
I think one of the biggest things that I would say, first of all, is patience. Don't beat yourself up if you didn't do things 100% right. It's a long journey, and sometimes you just have to take it minute by minute. It's not even day by day, because it could flip at any point. One of the other things that I would absolutely suggest for people, I've seen a lot of people when they get the diagnosis for their children, they are devastated, and it's almost like a death wish for people. And autism is not a huge deal anymore. It's so widespread now, and there's so much more known about it, and so many resources out there right now, that it's really not a bad thing. Getting the diagnosis is going to help open doors. It's going to help get that help for your kids, whether it's in school or out of school. So I think that's one of my things is you don't have to look at it as a blessing. You don't have to be excited that you have this diagnosis for your child because it is going to be a lifelong thing for them. It is going to be hard, but not to be completely devastated. It's things will work out. It's going to be a really hard journey sometimes. And you have to celebrate every little win. Um, with our older two, you celebrated, oh, you learned how to walk and it's your first birthday and your first lost tooth. And with our autistic kiddos, they, that first time that they stop themselves from throwing something, or the first time they come to you and say, well, I'm frustrated because of this, or, there's so many things that you go to bed that night and you're so excited and I can't believe they actually verbalized that, or there's so many more things you can celebrate too, because they're going to have so many more hurdles that they're going to have to jump over. So you need to make sure to celebrate those and make a big deal out of them so that the kids know, hey, this is good. This is something that I want to continue doing because look at this praise that I'm getting. So, patience, take it a day at a time, and just celebrate all of the wins.
And from my perspective, just to take that a step further, as parents, you need to learn how to reward yourselves sometimes when you have a win. It's not just about when your kids have a win, it's when you have a win. When you've, remembered to do something in a certain way, or sometimes it's even just at the end of the day, you get the kids to bed and you and your wife, you don't get out much because you got kids and they require your attention. Having a date night where you just sit and maybe order some Del Taco at night and watch some TV and just cuddle for a half hour or whatever. Take that time to make sure to reinvest in yourself and to celebrate your successes as well, so that you don't feel like everything is completely revolving around this one thing. You have to be able to let yourself out of that occasionally and be somebody else.
One of the other things is don't be afraid to ask for help.
Yeah.
If you have family members or friends that can handle watching these kids, I'm going to stress that, can handle watching these kids so that they don't end up in the middle of a really busy street when they're a year old. Um, you know, if they're willing to, we have been extremely fortunate in the fact that I grew up with cousins with special needs. So everyone in my family absolutely loves kids with special needs. Jeff's family some
Training.
has had training and stuff as well. So we have been extremely fortunate where we can call up and say, hey, can you guys take the kids for the day? Or at this point, now that we have nieces and nephews that are older, we'll go to a family thing and the older kids are like, hey, can I take them down to the park? Sure. Because we know that they've been there and we can trust them and they know what they're getting into. And so definitely lean on people if you have that support system. So that way you can take those breaks away from home if necessary. And just remember that you're not alone. There are a lot of us out there and we all close the door and cry sometimes and yell and, you know, why me? And you'll get through it. Just keep plugging along.
Tatum's great. Here's the takeaways that I got from what Tatum told us about today. So data can tell us two main things. We typically think data shows us individual progress, and it does. That's number one. But it can also give us information about how effective interventions are. The reason that's important is the onus is really on the practitioner to adjust to the changing needs of each person and services. There's no cookie cutter intervention, and there shouldn't be. And as is the theme with so many of our episodes, be empowered to ask questions. It's okay and really encouraged to ask questions. If there's something on a progress report that you don't understand, ask the person who wrote it, the BCBA, what it means, and have them explain it to you. If the report could be more effective for you in a different format, maybe a list instead of graphs, that's okay too. We should be able to adapt as behavior analysts to meet the needs of not only the person in services, but also everyone who loves that person in services. So if you have questions for Tatum, send them over to us. We'll get them over to her. It's autismnavigationpod@outlook.com.